Okay, I think we'll get started. So nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to the 16th Otago Energy Research Centre Symposium. It's really good to see you all here. Before we start, I think it's important to recognise the special relationship between Ngāi Tahu and the university as treaty partners. So as part of the university community, we all share collective responsibility to give effect to the treaty. And one really important part of this is to formally acknowledge Ngāi Tahu as tangata whenua and having rangatiratanga and mana over this territory at the start of this hui. This involves formally acknowledging the runakas of Otako, Puketeraki, and Mauraki. In this spirit, I'd like us all to join in and recite a traditional karakia. So I'll just put it up on the slide. Stop it. All right. That easy. Oh, okay. Perfect. Yep. I'll stop the share then. Okay. So hopefully this is familiar to you. Okay. All together now. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te taonga. Ki mā kina ki tau uta. Ki mā taratara ki tau. E hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he kura, he hau hu. Tihe Māori ora. Thank you very much. Okay, so my name's Michael Jack. I'm one of the co-conveners of the Otago Energy Research Centre, along with Sean Connolly, who's in the audience here. So this is the 16th symposium. So we've been going quite a long time, and it's great to see so many familiar faces, but also a lot of new faces. We've got 140 registrations today, so most people are actually online, which is a kind of a new thing for us to have so many people online. And I'd like to kind of acknowledge the people who have pulled this program together today and tomorrow. So special thanks to Nina Campbell from MB and Sean Connolly for pulling together the first day of the symposium, and also Jen Purdy at the back there, recovered from COVID, great. For helping organize the second day. So we've got a really exciting program for you today. You may notice that the online program is a little bit out of date, unfortunately. So the up-to-date program is the one that's on the doors, but we've also got a few printed programs if you would like to view those. So I think I will pass the mic over to Sean to introduce our first keynote speaker.
Pam, are you there?
I am indeed.
Great. If you want to share your screen, and I'll introduce you. Kia ora. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. PamWyne. Pam has been involved in the area of fuel poverty for a number of years, so very much related to our discussions on the first day today, and really an opportunity for us to think a little wider and get more of an international perspective in terms of how various other places are addressing issues of fuel poverty. So Pam leads the fuel poverty team in the Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy. And so that team works closely with a wide range of stakeholders across all sectors of the development and delivery of fuel poverty policies in England. And this includes working with colleagues in other government departments and across other agencies in the UK. So that team also provides secretariat duties for the Committee on Fuel Poverty, which is an advisory non-departmental public body that advise on the effectiveness of policies aimed at reducing fuel poverty and encourage greater coordination across all organizations working in that space. So Pam has lots of experience in this topic in particular, has also worked across a range of different government departments through her career, working on issues of, on social issues, working in the London Docklands project, various local environmental organizations, and is also a co-chair of the CARES network in the Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy. So without further ado, I'd like you all to join me in giving Pam a very warm welcome in the London evening to our symposium this year.
Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate that. And forgive me, folks, the way things are shared, that I can't actually see you at the moment, but real pleasure to be able to join you this evening for us, Monday morning, I know for you. And it's a great pleasure to be able to share a little bit of my experience on fuel poverty and a policy, as you'll see from the heading, a policy perspective from England. I'll come on to that in a moment in terms of how we're organised. Just to say that as well as myself, my colleague Rob Lloyd, who is an analyst in the department and leads on analytical work relating to fuel poverty, is also dialed in. And so when we come to questions and answers, you know, we will both be able to participate in that with you. So if okay, I'll just move on through the slides and say, firstly, a big thank you to the team and to Nina in particular for reaching out and to inviting us to come and participate in the session today. The role of BEIS is one which Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It's a mouthful. So we refer to ourselves as BEIS as a department. And it's fair to say that we are the lead department over here for fuel poverty issues. However, we don't work in isolation. That's already been referred to in the introduction. And it's something that I'll come back to as I go through my presentation to you today. Our actual area of work sits within a wider net zero consideration for energy and domestic buildings and businesses. So that's the route where we sit within the department. So you can see there is something there in terms of the context. Fair to say over here in the UK at the moment, we're also facing a number of cost of living issues more widely, which means that the issues around energy affordability and within that fuel poverty have come to the fore. In all my years working in this area, it's certainly been the most prevalent in terms of a recognition and understanding of what fuel poverty is and where people are struggling in terms of their energy affordability. That's come through a number of different reasons. The COVID pandemic, had COVID mentioned a couple of moments ago. Currently as well, there are other influences in terms of the cost of energy over here. And we are looking throughout at how we are helping support individuals and households in terms of how they can afford their energy and what they can do as an opportunity of making sure they have a quality and well-being in their living standards. So here's on this slide, just a summary of what we're going to cover. I'll talk a little about what we mean by fuel poverty. It's a phrase that is used very generally. It's also a phrase which has a very definite meaning for us in England. I'll talk a little about how we measure fuel poverty. So how do we look at the numbers of households, and how do we look at the impacts of what is contributing to whether or not households are in fuel poverty. I'll bring you an idea of our fuel poverty strategy. What is the approach that we take when we're looking to tackle fuel poverty? What are the things that we consider, and what do we actually feel are the important influences? Give you a bit of an overview of the support available, and whether that's financial support or support in terms of people's homes and the energy efficiency of their homes, and then just touch on stakeholder engagement, which is a hugely important part of everything that we do. So to start off with, what is fuel poverty? There are many different definitions and considerations. However, for us, the three key factors that contribute to whether a household is considered to be fuel poor is the household income. So we talk here of a low household income in terms of having the prevalence for people to be in fuel poverty. Energy prices. What is it that people are having to pay for their energy cost? What is it that people would need to pay to keep their home warm? And we talk about the low energy efficiency of a property. If all of these three come together, then a household will be considered to be fuel poor. So it's if they are on a lower income and they are unable to heat their home for a reasonable cost. One thing that I will say at this point is that we say about what people would need to heat their home rather than what they actually use, because one of the things that we are aware of is the fact of people making choices and not always heating the home to the standard to which we would say would be the most beneficial for them in terms of their health and well-being. We'll come on to that more as I go through. So what's the driver for us in terms of tackling fuel poverty? What means that we have a reason to be taking this action? So as well as the social angle of this, we have a legislative requirement. Back in 2000, the Warm Homes and Energy Conservation Act was passed. It was England and Wales. And what that actually sets out as a requirement around tackling fuel poverty. As I say, within BEIS, we look after England only and the target related to that. So that's what I'll be talking about today, and the statistics that I'm referring to are for England. So our target is to ensure that as many fuel poor homes as is reasonably practicable achieve a minimum energy efficiency rating of band C by 2030. We also have some interim milestones for that, a band E and band D. Now, in terms of our requirements, as well as setting that target, and I'll talk a little bit more about the energy efficiency rating and how we come to measure that. The strategy within the legislation, a strategy was also required to be set, and I'll take you through that. Our original strategy was published soon after the Act was enacted, and then we had a review a number of years ago, and our most recent published in 2021. But more on that later in terms of where we get to. So our consideration in terms of how we measure fuel poverty, and this will help explain our energy efficiency ratings that I refer to here. We have a big statistical activity in terms of looking at how we measure the number of households that are in fuel poverty. The key component of that is data which is taken from the English Housing Survey. And as you can see here, that's data which is carried out both by interviews with households, around 13,000 per year, and that includes income information. That's looking at the household characteristics and understanding more about those households. There are also around 6,000 physical surveys of dwellings carried out. And there we will be looking at the energy efficiency. So that will be looking at the information on what measures are in the property, what the energy source is, what the structure of the building is, the type of home it is, so that all of that comes together. The data from that physical survey is reported over a 2-year period, so 24-month survey period. So it's quite a lengthy process in terms of what we do. When we're looking at that information, we are looking to bring together some of those key components for us to understand the likelihood of a home being in fuel poverty. The metric that we use to measure whether or not a home is fuel poor is something called the low income, low energy efficiency metric. Lily to its friends. It's a good acronym to use. And Lily will find a household to be fuel poor if they have a residual income that is below the poverty line. And we look at this after we take account of what people will have had to use for their fuel costs in their home, and lives in a home that has an energy efficiency rating below band C. So in terms of our different measures of fuel poverty and how we look at the ratings there is a consideration of the low income, low energy efficiency metric. It's Lily as an indicator, it has those dual measures, and it will actually help us to understand what that means in terms of looking at the propensity for a home to be fuel poor. We don't have absolute knowledge, but we can look at the propensity and look at that regarding energy efficiency. So within it, we have 2 particular points, which is the number of households, and we also have a fuel poverty gap. I've got a little bit more information on that to come. But in terms of us looking at the fuel poverty energy efficiency rating, we base that predominantly on a standard assessment procedure that the government has, which is actually looking at the energy performance of domestic properties. Through that, a property that is highly energy efficient at the top of the rank would be an A rated. The least energy efficient would be a G rated. So that's the base measure that we have. We then build on that and we look at the impact of the policy interventions that we have that directly affect household energy costs. A score is given between 0 and 100, and we then come to translate that into an energy efficiency band. Again, A to G, so A being the highest, G being the lowest. So you can see here, we're heading towards the top of that, and that is the aspiration that we have and what we're aiming to get people towards. The costs of energy that go into our modelling are all themselves modelled. So in terms of us looking at this, and so we don't look on the low-income households with low energy efficiency as not fuel poor, where, as I say, when they're limiting their use of energy or rationing their use of energy. So, for example, they may not be heating their home effectively. It's looking at the fuel requirements of the household and the corresponding prices that would be there. So that gives a feel for sort of the elements that go into us modelling fuel poverty and what we're doing. Each year, we publish fuel poverty statistics. There is a time lag on these, as you'll appreciate from the data, the time that it takes to collate the data. So, for example, in February 2022, the most recent stats that were published, they relate to 2020. The report that we produce looks at the number of fuel poor households in England. You can see the number here, or the percentage here, we were saying was around 13% of households that were fuel poor in 2020, over 3 million. We also report on the fuel poverty gap. The fuel poverty gap is looked at in 2 ways. That is the reduction in the fuel costs that would be needed for any household to not be fuel poor, at £223 in 2020. And then the aggregate gap, so the total of that would be around 705 million. The publications that we produced also, though, include projections out to 2022. Now, the timing of those means that they will have taken information available at the point in time of publication. Clearly, lots has changed and lots has happened since that time. So our next statistics will be published around February 2023. So then things will be updated then. In terms of what do we produce, there is very large set of data that's set out and background information that people have access to in terms of what we put in there. My statistical colleagues produce a lengthy document which goes through all of the detailed tables, and I'll give you a couple of examples of some of the things we produce on the next couple of slides, just to give you a flavour for what we look at. We have information which breaks down the profile of different households, so you will look at that by maybe the composition of the household, the age of the property, the location of the property, to give a feel for all the different sort of cuts that people might be interested in. We have some trends which look at what's happened over time. We also produce a very nice accessible fact sheet for, you know, for using in terms of snapshots of information, and there's just one page of that there given just as an example for you. All of this is available online, and I've got some links towards the end of the presentation, which you can obviously have then to take away and look at. In terms of looking at who the fuel poor are, here's just one example of a slide that we have, which gives an indication of the combination of data in terms of the numbers of households that are fuel poor, but also the fuel poverty gap. So you can see here graphs in terms of saying single parents, the highest proportion of households in fuel poverty. Whilst it's a different group, it's couples aged over 60 who have the highest average gap in terms of what we're looking at. So you can see here, you've got the lone parents, and then you have the highest gap in terms of the couples over 60. Number of influencing factors there in terms of, you will not see much change in terms of income for the couples of that older age, for example, if things do change. One of the things we're really interested in is looking at the prevalence and depth of fuel poverty across different regions of England. So this gives you a feel for those different, forgive me for the acronyms, I'm not spelled out on here, but it gives you a feel that so for example, if we look at the proportion of fuel poor households, that is greatest in the West Midlands, so that will be around the Birmingham area, in terms of that conurbation of what we're looking at there, just above Yorkshire and Humber. In terms of the different areas, so that is the greatest proportion of people who were likely to be fuel poor in that area, whereas the map on the orange red colouring is showing you that the southwest, so Cornwall, Devon and adjoining counties would come out as the area with the greatest fuel poverty gap, so people will have the biggest difference that would need to be made up for them to actually be able to no longer be considered fuel poor, followed by the east of England. Again, a number of contributing factors there, which could be around the average income, could also be around fuel use and fuel type in different areas of what's happening there for the fuel gap. You're looking at some quite rural areas in both the southwest and the east of England. So I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour for the statistical side of things. I'm then going to move on to the fuel poverty strategy and the policy side, which is where my work focuses and where I lead on those sorts of areas. So fuel poverty strategy, as I said, was something that was required to be published in terms of the 2000 Warm Homes Act. In terms of looking at that area there, we had our most recent publication back in February 2021. Seems longer ago, if I'm honest, but it was only that long ago. And so what we actually have here is a comprehensive document, an updated strategy, which took a fresh look at everything that was happening in relation to fuel poverty. The strategy document, which is something which we consulted on with many of our partners in terms of what we were looking at, outlined all of the key policies and programs that we had in place at the time. It set out the funding that had been committed and had already been, and gave an idea of what had already taken place, and it set out the regulations which were also being shared. It introduced our new fuel poverty metric, so that's Lily. We had previously done something which is called low income, high cost. Within our strategy, looking at the time and what else was going on, we talked about vulnerability in many different ways, and we have updated our vulnerability principle, identifying particular low income groups that we consider particularly vulnerable when living in a cold home. I'll talk a little more about the principles as we go through. We also, for the first time, introduced a new sustainability principle. So bringing together fuel poverty with other wider sustainability considerations around net zero, for example. When we published the strategy, we had 4 guiding principles that we put there. We have cost effectiveness. The cost effective consideration here is around the best return. So what's proportionate? What is it right to expect people to be doing? What is it right to be thinking around in relation to the energy bill, the energy costs, and carbon savings, for example? How do we get that balance if we are asking others to be making that investment? How is that set out? We recognise the challenges and the work that was needed to be looking at that. So cost effectiveness is one part of the consideration when we're looking at any of the issues that underpin our strategy and how we respond to the challenges. We identified the issue of worst first. So what do we mean by that? Well, here we're looking at the severity of the challenge of fuel poverty. We're looking at the severity of the problem. What is it that we're trying to achieve and we're trying to tackle? Some of those who face the largest fuel poverty gap will face some of the worst housing, will be in some of the areas that really need and the least energy efficient homes. So we're looking at the worst first targeting. How do we make sure that we reach those people? How do we make sure that offers are available to them when we are looking at developing and bringing forward our different support mechanisms? We've then looked at vulnerability. We recognise that some people and some households are more likely to be impacted by living in a cold home. Our National Institute for Clinical Excellence identified a number of different groups who were considered more at risk. You can see they're listed here. So we're talking older families, older individuals, children who are below school age, so below 5, we'll be talking about. We're also talking about people who are living with either a disability or a long-term health condition, which makes them either at greater risk from cold-related illness or are more likely to be spending more of their time at home, possibly with limited mobility, so therefore less able to address issues if they are not able to stay warm. How can they make those changes? And one thing we were looking at there was both in terms of physical health and well-being, but also mental health and well-being. So we're looking at the vulnerability and who are the people who are most likely to be impacted. And then finally, as I mentioned, we introduced a sustainability principle. So this is making sure, or doing our very best to make sure policies align. There can be challenges in that. So we're looking about how do we bring together issues of decarbonisation, of equality, as well as energy cost. How can we bring all of those together in what it is that we're doing? And looking at the way that we bring all of that into one place, what benefits can it have and how can it really help to make a difference in tackling inequalities? And actually the whole of that bringing together the role in supporting people to potentially be moving away from fossil fuel based systems in their homes, but at the same time recognising the need for people to have an effective and adequate, a working central heating system, for example, and making sure that people have the right measures in terms of the installation in their properties. So that's what's really set out in our strategy document, which again, available online, which goes through all of our approaches. The strategy, as I say, was published back in February 21. We said that we would review it about every 3 years. In practical terms, that means we need to be starting to think ahead before too long. So we're always looking at the issues in there. So how do we keep a track on what it is that we're doing? We've published a document, what comes next. Now, next slide, I'm not expecting you to be reading this all, but just as a bit of a reference, we gave ourselves 21 commitments within the strategy and had a number of outcomes that we were sort of targeting around that. And what outcomes did we want to get? We want to be able to show the progress that we're making against our milestones and our target. We want to be seeing about the increased comfort and lower bills. We want to know about improved health and well-being, all these things that I've mentioned already. We're always looking to improve our baseline of information, our understanding, our evidence base. What is it that we can do to use that, and how can we take that forward? We want to target our support most effectively. We want to make sure that the resources that we have available are driven in the right way to reach the right people in the right time. Yes, we are looking to lower carbon emissions and help in the route of that. And we're also looking at improved partnership working and bringing people together. And how can we make sure that delivery works for everybody at the local level and the national level too? I should say, sorry, I'm going to go back here, because one of these is about engaging as well with people overseas. So thank you. Opportunity, a good mark against one of our commitments to be able to talk to you today. So thank you. What support's available? I'm just going to give you a few examples of some of the types of support that we have available. And this is support, some of it for the energy efficiency of homes, and some of it in terms of financial support to help people with their energy costs. So the energy company obligation, that's an obligation that we place on larger energy suppliers to provide energy efficiency and heating measures, as we say here, to certain low income and vulnerable households. We identify those households principally through their receipt of some means tested benefits. And it's people who are living in the least energy efficient homes. This is actually happening across Great Britain, so that's England, Wales, Scotland. In terms of the scale of that, it's something that's been going for a while. The current version, Eco 4, that's running at the moment through to 2026, that has a value of £4 billion. I say that's an obligation that's placed on our energy suppliers, and they will be installing energy efficiency measures into people's homes. We have something called the Home Upgrade Grant, and that's funding through our local authorities to help improve the energy performance of off-gas grid homes in England. So this is for people who may not have traditionally received support through some of the schemes which have been running for some time. So here we're looking at a particular group of households who may have a particular set of needs. Our social housing decarbonisation fund. The social housing sector, so it's housing authorities who are looking at providing those homes. We're looking at them upgrading a significant amount of their stock, which is currently below our energy performance certificate C. So we're looking to bring people up to that standard. To be fair, it's fair to say that the social housing sector actually has some of the better quality of housing stock overall in terms of what energy efficiency rating there are, but there is still plenty to be done. So this is a really, really important scheme, and one which helps some of those who are in that particular housing sector. And that may tend to be people who are on some of the lower incomes in places. Then finally here, we're just talking about the local authority delivery scheme, LAD. Here we're looking at aiming to raise energy efficiency of low income and low energy performance homes. Again, you're looking at the worst, so you're looking at EF and G rated homes, and how can we do that? But the important thing here is it being delivered through our local authority partners. So this is our local councils, because they know their local areas and they can actually help to bring the activity and engagement through in a way that is really important in taking that action. So those were some examples of energy efficiency improvements that are out there at the moment. Now we're coming on to some of the financial and energy cost support which is available. The warm home discount is a rebate which comes off people's energy bills, their electricity bills through this winter. And it's for certain, again, low income vulnerable homes. We are targeting that again through receipt of state benefits, which are certain focused on those who have the lowest income. About 3 million people will get that. And that's a £150 rebate that will go off their bill. That's happening now as we enter our winter. And that's something that is happening in a relatively automated way for the vast majority of people. The winter fuel payment is something which has been in existence for quite some time, and pensioner households, depending on age, can get between £100 and £300 each year and that is not linked to household income levels. That's across the board for all pensioner households. We also have the cold weather payment, which is £25 payment a week for people who are on certain benefits, which is available at times when the weather is or is predicted to be for a 7-day period 0 or below. Now this year, for the first time, we have something called the Energy Bill Support Scheme. And this is an additional support that has been announced in relation to the higher energy costs that we are currently facing over here. And that is a £400 government discount, which is being paid to all households with their energy bills this winter. And that's being delivered for those who pay by direct debit. It will be delivered by a reduction of £66 or £67 a month off your bill. And then for those who are on prepayment meters, they are receiving vouchers to enable them to get that same support. Then finally, we have also introduced the energy price guarantee, and that reduces the unit cost of electricity and gas this winter. So the way in which that works is there is a level of £2,500, which has been shared as the level at which the average household would be expected to pay for their bill, their annual bill. And that is something that's been set, and the difference being made by government there. So there is a difference in terms of the energy price guarantee. We also have an energy price cap, which goes alongside this, which we can talk more about if that's of interest. You'll be seeing here that some of this support is in reflection of wider energy affordability issues, which we're facing at the moment. So this slide then goes on to cover some of the cost of living support, which I won't read all of this through, but it gives you a feel for the fact that we are enhancing some greater support for individual groups who might be facing particular hardship. So for example, you can see we have disability cost of living payments, and we also have something here which I've put as the household support fund, which is something that is delivered through local authorities as an additional available support for them to use on a local basis in response to particular needs. Just earlier this month, there was an announcement from our Chancellor to say in terms of what was being extended into 2023-24. So you can see here that some of this is rolling forward and that there will be further payments and support, recognising the anticipated ongoing high level of energy costs. So, final area I'd just like to come on to is stakeholders. I've mentioned some of the different groups as I've gone through my presentation, and I just wanted to say that from our perspective, it's hugely important that we work closely with our stakeholders. There is a lot that we learn and there is a lot that we share in terms of looking at that understanding of how people work in the local, with their local partnerships and in local delivery, that they have lots of good information that we want to really be able to engage with. Energy suppliers, I said, they have obligations placed on them, but they also have an understanding and knowledge of their customer base. Our local authorities who do such a lot of local delivery, but again, lots of local information. We also work with our charities and those who have a particular interest in terms of fuel poor consumers, those who may be particularly impacted. So whether that's, for example, Age UK, who are particularly focused on the older part of society, or National Energy Action, who are the national fuel poverty charity. We work very closely with quite a number of charities in terms of working through the issues that they see and that are brought to their different organisations. We also work with citizens' advice to give advice to partners and to individuals. Representative organisations are those who will look at particular scenarios. So it may be people who live in rural areas or people who have a particular housing tenure type. We will take their knowledge and information and work with them and share our thoughts with them and look at the opportunities that there are to work together. And last but not least on this bulleted list is government departments. We in BEIS lead on fuel policy, but we don't work alone. We work very closely with colleagues in other departments that cover issues such as health, as housing, Also our colleagues who work in our Department for Work and Pensions, who look after all of our state benefits, as well as looking more widely into the environmental issues that come under other auspices. And of course, we work with our colleagues in the different administrations. So Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, we talk to very regularly in terms of understanding what they are doing and how their programmes work. And finally on here, the Committee on Fuel Poverty, which was mentioned in the introduction. The committee is a small group who are appointed by BEIS, by our ministers, in terms of looking at the progress that is being made towards the targets, and also looking as a challenge function and to being that organisation who work with us. It's chaired by Caroline Flint, who's former MP, former minister, and has a number of experts who sit on that. It's a small group with just 6 people, but they work very closely in terms of looking at and challenging and understanding what we do, and working in that way. And as has been said, we provide secretariat for that body. So I really hope that has been a helpful sort of canter through lots of what we do. There's some links here to some of the key documents, which you can obviously have for reference. And then finally, thank you for listening to me, and also very happy now to have a conversation, take questions, or indeed answer any points people have. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Pam. That was wonderful. And we've got many of those wide range of stakeholders in the room here today. So I imagine there will be lots of questions. If you do have any questions, stick your hand up and I'll pass the mic around. If you're online, either stick your hand up on Zoom or put it in the chat box, and hopefully I will run back and forth and get to it. Gareth?
Gareth Cartwright here from Community Energy Network. I've got 2 questions, but maybe the first one, just really interested in the approach to measuring the gap between what's required and what they've got. Do you do that? Do you do an analysis or have a metric there around how much it's going to cost to bring the house up through the various bands? That's the first one. The second one was you've got a large number of payment opportunities there, subsidies and fees and what have you. Do you have, does that happen automatically, or do you have people representing the vulnerable that can apply on their behalf?
Okay, thanks very much for those questions. In terms of, I'm going to take the second one first, if that's okay. And so in terms of what's, do we have people who can apply on people's behalf? Yeah, there are different, you're right. Number one, you're right to say there are lots of different schemes out there. There are lots of things that go on, and there are lots of different ways that those are delivered. And we will normally be looking for individuals to engage with those. However, very much we're aware that they can also need and welcome support from organisations who can apply on their behalf with their consent and with their engagement. I said there, some of those are delivered through local authorities. Some of them may also be working through local charity partners and local organisations who will deliver the engagement on that. So yeah, very much working in partnership in terms of how that works. The fuel poverty gap. Rob, do you want to, or I can talk on this. I'm going to invite my colleague Rob to come in on this, yeah, if that's okay.
Cool, thank you, Pam. Hi everyone. I hope you're having a good day thus far in New Zealand. I wish I was there. Yes, so on the fuel poverty gap, is the different we have the mark up to what is the energy efficiency rating C and what the bill would be there, so the required energy consumption at that level, and then we then have all the bands that are below, and then what we do is we then have the comparison between what the costs are between those bands, and that's where you can then get to what is then the required amount of money that you would have to pay that household in order to take off their bill to get them to what is an energy efficiency rating C. We don't typically present it at each of the bands, but what that gap is, so the average gap is for each household, is to get them out of fuel poverty. So in theory, what we could do is that £705 million, you could, if you could target it absolutely perfectly, you would be able to pay each household that set amount, and you could then in theory take them out of fuel poverty in that way. The problem with that is that we don't have brilliant data where we could then absolutely know exactly who these households are, and that's because we rely on these statistics from the English Housing Survey. So you have the fact that it's based on the survey and then extrapolated up to the total population.
Any other questions in the room? Just while you think of your question, just a couple that have come through in the chat. The first one around the difference in the maps and what explains that, and the second one around, you've talked about the state of affairs, but what are the trends? If you could address that while I go around.
Sure, yeah.
Would you like-
I think on the maps and the difference between those, do you want to do Rob, or shall I?
I will, because I wrote down some thoughts while you were talking, because I did see them go into the chat. Sorry, I'm just going to get the question up again because I've put the chat away. There we go. So is it the case that the poorest are moving southwards warmer? So it's not quite. So I think the reason for this is that so the southwest is typically an area that has low incomes. So on average, it has quite low incomes. And that's because it's in an area in the country that's not hugely dense in its population. And also there's a lot of seasonal work there. So actually you typically have lower incomes. So that's why you're probably going to get the fuel poverty gap quite large. And also the housing there. So you're going to get people in fuel poverty there. Sorry, the particular gap is likely to be because of the state of housing there and because of the weather as well. So the important part of it is that typically in the UK you get a lot of the weather coming from west to east. So I had to do there. West to east, you get a lot of weather fronts that go over on that side of the country. So you're going to get typically a lot of weather there, which then causes issues with the type of building and that sort of stuff. Pam, was there anything on that one you wanted to add?
I think the only thing I think as well, in terms of looking potentially at fuel use as well, in terms of what we're looking at those areas. So I think that brings it together, the combination of things in there on that one. Yeah. Then
the second question. So I had a look at the projections that were for the following year. So for 2022, for 2021, it was 12.8%, and then 2022 was 12.5%. Now, the big caveat with those numbers is that those projections were done before we had a massive increase in energy prices. So we will have a new publication that will come out early in 2023. And we would expect actually those projections might well change. So in the UK, we've just had a rocketing of prices over this year. So that will then be accounted for in the next projections. It won't be fully accounted for, but it would be accounted for in some way. So it's likely that although it shows that those numbers are going down, I would have thought it's probably not going to be going down by that much. It might be the same. It might tick up. But I'm not the statistician that has the drawing, is responsible for doing the publication next year for that.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Holmes. I work for VIA Architecture. Got two questions. Well, one, you talked about a sort of a heating gap to achieve a healthy home between what is actually the heating actually the user uses in the home versus what you pay for. I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit more. And the second thing, during this year, you guys had quite bad heat waves, and there's been sort of excess deaths due to hot climate. Wonder if you could talk to whether there's a forward-looking view at vulnerability to excess heat.
Sure, I'm happy to comment on those. So on the healthy, healthy temperature and how do we consider that and what heating used or not, I think the key point for us there is in terms of looking at households where there is an extended risk of somebody being impacted by a lower temperature in their home, particularly for an extended period of time. It's something that is getting quite a lot of engagement here at the moment, of what we're looking at in terms of housing quality and what that means. Traditionally, I think the level that's been talked about has been sort of 18 to 21 degrees in terms of what people are thinking of, but there's a continued debate with that with our health colleagues. We talk around what that is, and we're just moving into the realms of talking around what does this mean more broadly in terms of the health sector and how we can engage with that group. So I think it's something that we're keeping a watch on there and how we can encourage that, but making sure that we have that awareness of what the health impacts can be. And on the point on the impacts from warmer weather, you're quite right. Yeah, we had some much warmer summer than we've had for many a time. And yes, there is work I know going on thinking around, well, what might future cooling requirements be, and around appropriate ventilation in buildings and everything that comes with that. So yeah, that is something that is very much under. I think it's too early for me. I don't have detail or anything to to sort of openly share on that, but I will say it is very much in people's mindsets now. It's not only about the warming, it's about the cooling as well.
A couple more questions online. First from Jennifer, asking what the standards are for new builds in the UK or in England, I guess.
I'm going to have to put my hands up here and say that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head. It's an interesting one from a fuel poverty perspective. It's an area we do not engage with particularly broadly because it doesn't tend to be. I don't know if Rob's got the answer off the top of his head. If not, we can share that back, definitely.
Sadly, I don't. No.
And then another question from Phil around sort of the binary nature of fuel poverty. Sort of, is there a sliding scale there, or are people moving in and out, and what does that mean for the way programs and policies are developed and delivered?
Yeah, so definitely people will move in and out of fuel poverty for the way that we measure. There are people who will be either side of the line. In terms of our targeting of our measures and what support we give to people, I think both myself and Rob have alluded to the fact that we don't have absolute information, ways of targeting people individually who are fuel poor. We look at the way in which we can make the best proxies for that and the people who are most likely to be in risk of fuel poverty. Hence the fact we can do the support mechanism very often through receipt of a means tested benefit. So it's people who will be more at risk. So the chance of people being either side of, they may or may not actually be in fuel poverty at that point in time, but they are at greater risk. So that's the way in which that sort of proxy works. We're looking at the propensity for that. So that will help to do that. So in terms of, we don't measure on a sliding scale, but the delivery of support can happen in that way.
Any other questions from the room? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tom Kane from Kind Order. Just to follow up from Gareth's question, he asked the question about how much it would cost to, or if you track how much it would cost to raise people from one band to another. And you, I think his question was about retrofit, but you answered the question in terms of cost of heating. Do you track that as a measure or not?
In terms of how much it would cost, say, to raise somebody from one energy efficiency band to another, we don't track it in that way, but we will make estimates. I think it's fair, we can make estimates in terms of how much it would cost for a typical property or a typical household to be taken from that. So rather than tracking it in that way, and that feeds into sort of the evaluation, the analysis that Rob and colleagues are involved in.
Yeah, I was going to make the point. So it's a good question. So we don't typically have it costs this amount to get someone from a band E to a band D. It really depends on the nature and the type of their property. So depending on what the existing insulation might be in that home, it depends then what might be further measures which then improve the energy performance of that home. So it does change between different types of homes. And in the UK, we have most of our homes are on the gas grid, so we have a gas network. And what you would need there to reduce the cost of people on the gas network is different to then people who are then heating their homes through oil, that sort of thing. So it really does change. One thing that is on the policy side, where we're trying to improve energy efficiency, we're trying to get them up to that C. We will try to get homes up to a C, but sometimes you then stray into the cost effectiveness of, can we really get this home up to a band C or not? Typically, it'll be properties which are very, very old, listed buildings, that sort of stuff, where it's then very tricky to then put in sort of retrofit measures which are then cost effective and then don't cut across other things which are then, you can't do that to a listed building and that sort of stuff. So that's a long-winded way of saying it does differ between different homes.
All right, and maybe the last question from Miranda online. Do you consider energy literacy and energy education as part of your fuel poverty strategy?
Absolutely, yes. It's one of the things we're really concerned about in terms of making sure that people can understand what support may be available to them, how they can access that support, and actually making sure it's accessible to individuals in a way that means that they can engage with that. So yes, we work very closely with the different, as well as putting out our own sort of engagement opportunities. We will look at the ways that we can work with our energy partners to make sure that they can actually access advice and give advice in the right way to the households that need the support, recognising the fact that not everybody is going to understand what their energy rating is, or what it might mean if they're going to have an air source heat pump or a different type of energy measure, but also then making sure that if people are provided with different energy support into their home, that they understand how best to make use of that, if it's a different type or new heating system, for example, or if they're understanding in terms of what's the importance about how I maintain my home and all that goes with. So yes, it's very much both in terms of looking from the point of what support's available to me, how can I access that, and then how do I live in my home with those new measures installed, for example. So all elements of things we would look to be sharing that information in the most effective way.
Great. Oh, one last question.
We've got 1 minute left, so. Kia ora, Pam and Rob. Nina Campbell here from MB. Thank you for that presentation. Just squeeze in a last question. I'm really interested in the energy company obligation. We don't have anything of that type in New Zealand. So I just wondered if you could speak at all to whether you've got any recollection of how easy that was to bring into the market when it initially started, and also any challenges around that in terms of compliance, or perhaps opportunities in terms of gathering data about energy efficiency improvement.
Hi Nina, and thank you very much. Good to see you. Though I've been engaged in this area for ages, it even predates me. So, but what I do know is that it doesn't come without challenge, and it doesn't come without some issues along the way in terms of how it's actually how it's taken forward, and what's required, and how it's monitored. Our energy regulator, Ofgem, actually administer the scheme and oversee the scheme and have the reporting and everything that goes with. So there are issues in terms of looking at that. And one of the probably not unsurprising challenges that can come with eco is in terms of looking at what's the obligation for different suppliers, how is that set, what's required, what are the requirements that go alongside it, what are the requirements in actually what counts as a measure, how are things looked at. So it's an evolving program, I think, is what I would say for eco over time. There has been some work done looking at eco and its delivery, which we can dig that out and share links to that, so you can see in terms of how it's worked and what some of those challenges have been along the way. But it's a big program, and it has done an awful lot. That's the one thing I would say has made a big difference for a lot of households.
Great, thanks. All right. Thanks very much, Pam and Rob. That was a wonderful introduction to a different kind of approach for thinking about energy well-being, and you've provided a wonderful foundation for us that I'm sure we will refer back to throughout our conversations throughout the day. So I'd just like everyone to join me in thanking you once again for a fantastic presentation and for kickstarting the OERC symposium. We will.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been great to speak to you all and have the opportunity to do that. So I wish you a good couple of days.
Thanks. So right now we are moving into morning tea. We'll be back